guys, my name is Escarla. Welcome back to my channel. This is my little crafty corner of the universe where I like to document my making. Pretty much that revolves around knitting, spinning, crocheting, fiber arts related content. So if you're into that, please subscribe to the channel. Today we're going to be focusing on something very near and dear to my heart, and that is fiber preparation for spinning, specifically carding wool. My hope for this video is to tell you everything you need to know, put it all in one video, and also show you how I personally like to card my wool. Now, a little disclaimer, I am not an expert wool processor. This is simply what I've gathered through research and how I personally like to do things. So if you have a little bit more experience, if you have any tips or tricks you want to share down below, please sound off in the comments. I think it'll be really helpful for other people as well who happen to find this video and are scrolling down in the comment section. So without further ado, let's get right into it. All right, so I'm going to assume that you already have prepared your fiber, you've cleaned it, you've picked through it, and you're ready to get started with the processing. So you have two approaches you can take. You can either comb the wool or you can card it. And there are technically also some situations where you might want to do both. Now, you may choose to card your fiber when the staple length is a little bit on the shorter end, or if you have some inconsistencies in length. And you can either do that through a set of hand carders, or you could do it with a drum carder. A drum carder is definitely a little bit more on the expensive side, so I do recommend starting off with a set of hand carders. They both yield very similar results, but slightly different. Now, when you prepare your fiber with a hand carder, you create something called a rolag, which basically looks like a little cylindrical kind of cigar of fiber. And when you use a drum carder, you create something called a bat, which is a really large kind of sheet of fiber that you can spin from. Now, both of these preparations will result in a woolen prepped fiber. So you can either spin woolen style or spin kind of worsted style to create a semi-worsted spin, which is what I personally like to do. But I don't want to get too much into spinning because this is just about preparing the fiber. Now, your woolen prepped fiber will result in a woolen yarn, which is really great for trapping in heat, extra insulation. It's really great at trapping warmth because essentially when you're carding, you're kind of aligning the fibers and they're kind of less straight. So they're creating a lot more of a resistance to wind and to cold. It's also a lot loftier of a yarn and fluffier. Some may say it's not as strong, but from my experience, if you're spinning a 2-ply yarn, you'll definitely have the results you need to have a long-lasting garment. Now, another way you can prep your fiber is by combing it. I won't get too much into combing since this video is specifically about carding, but I would love to just share what that will result in. You typically will use a set of combs if you have a longer staple length or something like a double-coated fleece, because longer lengths of fiber can get a bit tangled with hand carders. You can still technically card longer fibers, it's just a little bit more difficult to work with. Now, when you comb your wool, you end up keeping all of the fibers parallel to each other, and the finished preparation is called a top. It results in a worsted yarn, which is much sleeker. All of the fibers are parallel and aligned to each other, so it provides a much smoother yarn. I'm currently wearing like a woolen prepped yarn, so you can see how fluffy and like halo-y it is. With a worsted yarn, you will have a bit more tamed fibers, although depending on what fleece you're working with, you might still have that halo vibe going on. Combing is also pretty essential in the scouring and prepping process of fiber because it's really good at getting rid of extra VM, vegetable matter, or any like icky bits in your fiber. So some people do tend to comb out their fiber and then card it. Carders can kind of get that vegetable matter stuck within them. So I do recommend carding once you have a very nice and clean fleece. Otherwise it can be a little icky. You don't want to get all that vegetable matter trapped in a woolen yarn because there's no way to get it out once it's spun into the yarn, and it'll create like lumps in your fibers. So both tools are very essential in fiber preparation, so I do recommend investing in a set of both if you're very passionate about it. Okay, so now that you know the difference between combing and carding, let's get a little bit more into carders and the different variations that you'll come across. So like I mentioned earlier, the two main forms of carders are hand carders or drum carders. Those are the main ones that you're going to use to fully prepare fiber. So let's get into what the differences are. So hand carders are usually made out of these wooden paddles, and they're covered in this fabric that are filled with all of these little metal teeth. You can either get a flat back paddle or a curved one. I personally love the curved ones because they kind of hug your leg really nicely when you're working on carding. And I feel like it works really well with the motions of your arm and your wrist. They are definitely a slower process and are better for like smaller production. Now, if you know that you're going to be making larger quantities of fiber, then you might want to invest in something like a drum carder. I will mention the hand carders are a lot more affordable, while a drum carder can cost you like $200 plus. Now, a drum carder is mechanical and is usually made up of 1 to 2 rotating drums. You essentially feed the fiber and rotate some sort of handle. There are electrical ones as well, and that kind of does all of the carding for you. It rotates and aligns that fiber. If you are trying to color manage, drum carders are a little bit more effective at that, but you can definitely still do that with your carders or with something else, which I'll get into in a second. Now, you also hear of something called a flick carder, which looks kind of like a hairbrush, but with really spiky metal bits. Like, you definitely don't want to comb your hair with this. But essentially, a flick carder is great for flicking the tips of fleece. So that helps get rid of any of that poopy or vegetable mattery bits. Like I mentioned earlier, you can also use hand combs to do that. But a flicker is a little bit more efficient because you just kind of flick up at the ends. They really just help open up the lock and prepare it for the carding process. However, I don't find that flick carders are the most important thing to have because you can technically just use your hand carder and just use kind of the edge of it to flick open a lock. It is a little bit more uncomfortable because they're much wider. A flick carder would probably be about this wide. But you can also look out for like a dog paddle brush or something smaller in that regard that will help flick open your ends. And the last thing that you'll find are something called blending boards, which are essentially like a big piece of wood with this same teethy fabric attached to it. And blending boards are really great for, like the name implies, blending fiber. So you can use it to blend different fibers. You can use it to create art yarns or like recycled yarns. I'm actually getting one for Christmas. I'm very excited to get it in the mail. You can have a lot of fun with the blending boards, and then it's a much more affordable approach to something like a drum carder, which is a lot more expensive. Okay, so let's get a little bit more technical and talk about something called TPI, which is teeths per inch. That's going to be really important in your decision-making process when you buy a carder because you'll see them in different TPIs. Like I said, TPI stands for teeth per inch, which is how many teeth are in the cloth within an inch of space. It basically determines how fine or coarse the tool will be for processing different fibers. For a coarser fiber, you're going to want to go with a lower TPI. With something more fine, you would want to go up on the range. So let's get a little bit into what kind of ranges you'll find. Now, the options you will usually see are 72 TPI, 110-ish TPI, and 190 TPI. So 72 TPI seems to be like the industry standard, what most people recommend you to start off with because it's the most versatile. So you can work with coarser fibers or medium to finer fibers as well. This is actually a 72 TPI carder, and I really have found this to be very versatile. So I do recommend investing in that if you're not sure what to go with. You can use the 72s to process finer wool. You might just need to process it a little bit longer. Now, the 110-ish is typically for finer wools like alpaca or merino, and the 190-ish is really more for things like cotton that are super, super fine. Now, for drum carders, the larger drum will usually be like the overall TPI for the preparation, while the smaller drum may have a slightly different TPI than the larger one just to help with the feeding process. I did want to share some little fun facts that I discovered while doing my research on carders. As you likely know, spinning is a very, very ancient art and has been around for many a century. It was very essential for there to be a spinner in the household, or for you to know a spinner in regards to actually having clothing, because, you know, before the Industrial Revolutions, these tools were extremely, extremely important. Technically, the earliest tool for fiber preparations were either your hands, which were used to open up the ends of locks, or combs. So combs came first, carders came after. Carding itself didn't come into being until between the 13th and 14th century in medieval Europe. The word carding itself comes from the Latin word cardus, which means thistle. Earlier carders used to be made with thistles or teasels, which are a plant that are really great at trapping wool. Hand carders also came before the spinning wheel, where people would card their wool and then spin it using a drop spindle, which, as you can imagine, was an extremely labor-intensive process. I personally really love drop spinning as well. I haven't done it in a while, but it was how I learned to spin, so maybe I'll do a future video on how to spin wool on a drop spindle. Okay, so let's do a little demonstration on how I personally like to card my wool. So as you can see down here, I have a bunch of clean fleece. I don't remember off the top of my head what breed this is, but I'll put it on the screen. But as you can see, I like to wash all of my wool, preserving the locks. So let's get ready to set up these carders. So what I like to do is set up the fleece so that the tips are pretty much up till the end of the paddle here. And I just push it down. And depending on your staple length, you might have to go higher or lower, but this is a fairly short staple length. And I like the tips out so that I'm able to comb out any of the debris that might be hanging out at the end. So you're just going to fill your card, but not overfill it, because then it'll be harder to card all the wool. So I probably do about 3 to 4 tufts of wool like this. All right, here's the last little bit. And that's perfect. Now, what you want to do is cross your legs. I find this is easiest because you're able to rest the curve of the paddle on your leg. It makes it a little more comfortable, but you can do it with your legs down and at the other end. You want to hold your hands like this, so you have a nice strong little grip going. With your other hand, you want to hold your paddle with the 3 fingers gripping the base here, and your other 2 fingers are spread out in the back, supporting the back of the paddle. And this just gives you a nice firm and flexible hold. So now gently comb out the ends. And then I just slowly start going a little higher. And your first pass is going to be a little bit tougher because it's the first time that you're kind of opening up the lock there. So I slowly kind of shift the paddle up higher, and you don't want to dig the paddle in. That's going to make it really hard. You're basically grazing the ends. Now, many people have kind of their own way of carding. Like normally you would just pass this over and then continue to card, but I just actually flip my carders. Sometimes I do it the other way, but I find that when I do this, I end up wearing out the paddles in the same way. And now we're going to card one more time. You can see I kind of do like a swaying motion that really helps lift any of the fiber that's left in the paddle. And now we're going to do a final pass. I find that 3 passes are enough for most fibers, but you may need a couple more if you're working with something a little finer. So again, I'm going to work at the ends, and because this is my final pass and I want kind of an even little roll lag, I'm going to work my way up the paddle. And that's my last pass. So if you want to lift anything that's left behind, you can always just kind of roll your paddle as such, and then all of the fiber is left here. So now it's time to make our little row lag. So what I do is, with the end of the paddle, you're gonna just make a T shape and then make a V and rock it back. And that'll pull away most of the fiber from the paddle. So now you have this kind of levitating, fluffy bed. And now we're gonna make a little fiber sausage. So I like to place my paddle down and just kind of roll a little hot dog, cigar, fiber turd, whatever you want to call it. And we have a little cylinder. And then I just kind of go over to kind of lock everything in. And there you go. You have a little row lag here. So here are a few row lags that I've already prepared. I like to just make a few of these, a bunch of these, and set them up for me to spin. And when you spin, you basically pick a little end here, and then you just spin straight off this little cigar shape. So I won't show you guys the spinning part of this, but this is some yarn that I made from this same exact fleece that was prepared exactly the same way. This is a really nice 3-ply yarn, so I spun pretty thinly, and I like to spin kind of worsted. So this is a semi-woolen yarn technically, but as you can see, it creates really nice lofty round yarn when you do a 3-ply. And then this is a 2-ply yarn that I made. All right, so the 2-ply is a lot thinner. It's definitely like a fingering to sport weight yarn. So you can see the two next to each other. But yeah, that's how I like to card my wool. I'll bring you guys closer so you can just get a little bit more of a close-up action. Okay, so you're essentially going from a lock of wool to carding it like I just showed you. You get these nice little row lags going, and then you get your finished yarn. This is the 3-ply I mentioned, and then this is a 2-ply. You can see it's a very like lofty and fluffy yarn. And this 3-ply would be really great for like a cabled cardigan or something like that. All right, guys, well, that is it for this video. I hope that you maybe learned something new, or maybe you're just refreshing your skills or refreshing your brain on how to card. Regardless, I hope this was very helpful for you. If you have anything you want to add or any suggestions for other people, feel free to leave them down below in the comment section. If you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing to the channel. It means the world to me. And you can also find me on Instagram at Starseed Creations for more daily stories and such. And until the next video, take care of yourself. Happy carding, happy knitting, happy spinning, whatever you're doing. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.